creating bad guy free zone. You know, there's so much published and broadcast about hatred and violence in the world today that, people are left wondering how to protect themselves. We're going to talk about that. So where do you begin when it comes to protecting yourself and your loved ones? Just like everyone else, I threw up a wall about the possibility of being attacked or having violence enter into my world. I wanted to ignore the thought of violence and block violence out of my life, especially because I was exposed to it early in my life, and I wanted to forget it. That's probably why I spent a lot of time wondering, where do you begin when it comes to protecting yourself in a world where every place you frequent has seen a lone shooter or a terrorist attack? Whether it's a restaurant or a movie theater, the mall, where you work, a hair salon, a concert, subway train, or even a nightclub where you just want to go out and have some fun with some friends. What is really interesting, from the time I was able to be on my own, my life has been mostly free of violence except for a few short periods in my life. So maybe because of my early life, I placed a wall around myself to protect me from any situation, environments that were violent. Unwittingly, that served me very well as a barrier against violence. Throughout my varied careers, I've met and been around people who did not have the luxury or perhaps they just didn't know how to distance themselves from violent situations. I've seen people, a few who were friends, but most associates and acquaintances who have suffered at the hand of violence. Watching their suffering made me feel helpless because as I talked with people over the years, I recognized after many conversations, had I been able to explain my concept of avoiding violence, it might have eased their suffering. Then again, perhaps it would not have. But I just wasn't afforded the luxury of finding out because I was talking to people after the violence had occurred in their life. I recognized early in my life, in my adulthood, that I had a gift for helping people. And over the years, I've had a lot of people come to me to discuss issues. Some were about violence, but most were nonviolent problems that they were experiencing. Still, people felt they could come to me and talk things through. There were a few cases where people came to me during a period where they were fearing violence or after a violent situation. And every time I would listen to these stories, a pattern evolved where people missed the signals that were bombarding them, indicating potential violence. It was as if they saw the red light but drove through the intersection anyway, literally losing track of that period of time. Everyone who drives has done that at some point. The red light was apparent, but not signaling the need to stop and rethink their course of action. This has always intrigued me because I've seen executives and companies ignore obvious signals, or at least obvious to others, and nearly destroy a company or a department of a company, which affected many lives. It's almost like an unconscious denial of obvious facts. I later began to recognize that this denial in many instances was because they were not familiar with the signals that were being sent their way. In some cases, they were aware, but uncertain about how to avoid the violence that was coming. In other cases, they simply denied the signals, hoping against hope the issues would not escalate and eventually go away. Most of the time, they did not. Then it was too late. From this analysis over the years, both from business insights and watching what happened to people, some things became evident to me about successfully avoiding danger and violence. First, people have a natural aversion to things that are unfamiliar and uncertain. If you don't know something or are uncertain about something, then you avoid it or even deny it. You know, in Special Forces, we had a saying, get comfortable with the uncomfortable. To do that, you had to define the uncomfortableness and then recognize how to overcome it. Secondly, when things are uncomfortable or painful, people tend to postpone doing anything until they are forced into dealing with it. I find this especially true when I watch people being interviewed after a lone shooter incident, and they say, I never thought this would happen to us, even though in the same breath in the interview, they say they have seen it many times on television happening to someone else. So since it didn't happen to them while they were watching television, they denied the possibility that it could happen to them, and then are surprised when it does. Now, admittedly, they are right about 99% of the time. But when it does happen, people suffer from guilt or emotional distress for the rest of their life because they weren't prepared. Thirdly, a lack of knowledge about what we could call symptoms of violence keeps people from recognizing behaviors that indicate potential violence. Fourthly, people are uncomfortable coping with conflict and often will avoid recognizing anything that could be construed as potential violent behavior. And finally, the fifth thing is people's lack of knowledge restricts them from taking preemptive actions to avoid the violent or troubling behavior. For example, people don't recognize the patterns of terrorist behavior. Therefore, they're not able to avoid situations leading up to a terrorist attack. Now, these observations led me to the concept of differentiating protection from self-defense. Now, I state in my book and many of my blogs and videos that it's better to avoid a threat than defend against a life-threatening attack. Protection is preventive by its nature, and self-defense is reactionary. The consequences for these two concepts are very different. Protection results in a winning outcome because the threat is avoided altogether, whereas self-defense is a losing concept. Because you've been attacked, you lose even if you win the battle. You know, you might be injured, but escape with your life. You're still injured. You might live with the trauma of taking another's life, even though they were attacking you. You have psychological repercussions. In a self-defense scenario, you could actually face criminal and or civil prosecution based on what you do. Protection is more difficult to implement because it focuses on human behavior as opposed to self-defense, which is reactionary and focuses on a set of skills or weapons to use at the time of attack. So the vast majority of professional security firms emphasize things focused on self-defense, like martial arts training or whatever, but market these things as protection. For example, some people believe carrying a concealed gun will cause a criminal to wonder whether you might have a gun and therefore avoid you as a victim. Now, the problem with this thought process, criminals and terrorists think and plan for targeting and attacking a victim. If you read the book, you would understand that. Some of the more violent criminals I've talked with simply assume you have a gun and then plan their attacks so you'll be surprised and not able to use your gun. Very seldom does the idea you might be carrying a gun deter them, even if you carry the gun in the open. The criminal would know this in advance because they stalk you as a target. And they know you're carrying a gun, and they simply surprise and shoot you first, then take what you have. Criminals and terrorists have a method of operation for targeting and attacking a victim. Given all this insight and discussing its meaning with many people, it struck me that people need to consider creating a scenario where they're not likely to be a criminal target. This would be protection versus self-defense. I term this creating a bad guy free zone. You create a place where you can relax because you have a strategy that minimizes your exposure to criminals or terrorists. I have written 2 books detailing how to create a bad guy free zone. These books are sold on Amazon and are entitled Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone and Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone While Traveling. Their links are in the video description below where you can buy the books. You know, it became evident to me that your best protection is actually your behavior. This is why the first chapter in my book is about understanding your values and beliefs and the culture that you choose to live in. If you truly understand who you are and your capabilities, and then combine that with the knowledge of how criminals operate and think, you can choose behaviors and actions that minimize your exposure to violence because of your knowledge. For example, if you're thinking about going to a protest meeting and you know the people who you are protesting against have a propensity for violence and maybe they'll be carrying weapons like Charlottesville, you may choose to avoid this particular protest and find another way to be secure and still make your points known. In summary, the best way to protect yourself is to know yourself. Know your limits, strengths, and weaknesses. Be clear about your values and how those values and belief systems will transfer actions that will prevent violence or react successfully to violence. For example, if you're a Christian, you need to be clear about your values in taking another's life. If someone is 15 feet away from you and advances towards you, does your religious belief provide for a moment of doubt and hesitation? Or are you willing to fire upon someone and take their life out of fear for your life? Being clear about this point needs to be understood in advance of the attack because you will not have time to think about it during the attack. Yet most people never play this scenario out in their minds. Do you tend to think of people as generally good, and do you tend to ignore unusual and suspicious behavior from other people? Or are you someone who is alert to abnormal behaviors and will question those behaviors to determine if the suspicious behavior is truly a threat to be coped with? Are you a racist? Do your values tend towards bigotry? You need to understand all of these factors to help you understand how you will react to prevent a violent situation or how you will react during a violent situation. This is why I say the best protection against violence is knowing yourself. In the first chapter of my book, I provide a basic model to help you understand how to think through cultural orientation. This combined with the knowledge about how criminals and terrorists think and operate will help you define a protection strategy. The book also provides a model to organize all this information into an action plan. Today, there are a lot of television shows and movies about special operations units where it's about a SEAL team or Delta Force operations team or a law enforcement SWAT team. All these special operations units have something in common. They first know themselves well enough to know how they will react in a deadly force encounter. They train consistently to ensure their identification of suspicious behavior, and they can recognize it instantly. Secondly, they study their enemy and know their behaviors and methods of operation. Special Operations Unit train rigorously using information they have about themselves and the enemy to create tactical scenarios that will achieve their objectives without violence. However, they also know that nothing is 100% guaranteed, and therefore have thought through scenarios where they would encounter violence and how to react to the violence. Now, certainly, special operation teams are an extreme example of people who actually go to the fight versus avoiding the fight. But even during rescue or capture missions, they do everything they can to avoid confrontation and achieve the objective without violence. This is a protection mentality. If there is no violence and everyone comes home alive and uninjured, the mission is a win. So how would you use a similar approach in your everyday life? Let's review a sample scenario that might fit you, the everyday citizen. Okay, you're on a vacation and you're visiting London. Part of the reason for visiting London was the concert for the Rolling Stones and being held in London. So how would you use a protection mentality to ensure your security and safety and help you relax and enjoy your trip? First, let's say you bought my book and learned about what protection is all about and some steps you can use to protect yourself. In other words, you're beginning to educate yourself. Next, prior to going to London, you've enrolled in the State Department's STEP, STEP program and loaded their app Smart Travel on your smartphone, and then provided the State Department with your itinerary to include events you plan to attend. All right. Then you go down to the State Department's website on your phone and you review any travel alerts for the areas where you will be traveling. Now, the website says there are no travel alerts for London, but you should be cautious because of recent terrorist activity in the city and Europe in general. Now you know from reading my book that terrorists like soft targets that are hard to defend or have minimal security, such as sporting events or concerts. So you're immediately alerted to the need to kind of like check out security for the concert. Usually the concert website often lists things you can and cannot bring to the concert. They will also list what the standards for entering the event will be. For example, bags will be thoroughly searched before entering. You will undergo a pat down or one body pat down search and may be detained for further interrogation if you need be. So you now feel fairly comfortable about the security, so you can relax a little bit about attending the concert. Those are pretty stiff criteria. When you arrive, you take notice about the security at the gate, but also security among the crowd and whether there is armed or unarmed security present roaming in the crowd outside. Armed security, contrary to most people's belief, means security has deemed this a potential target for a terrorist because of large numbers of people and the difficulty controlling large numbers of people at one time, particularly outside the arena. So you see armed guards and you feel somewhat more comfortable and you get in the line. While you're in the line, a pair of security officers are walking up and down the line with a dog on a leash. The dog is sniffing bags and people as they walk. You've seen it before. You now know security is employing bomb and drug sniffing dogs as a security precaution. You now reach the entrance and find the guards are thorough in their search of bags and people and are asking specific questions of people that are designed to detect suspicious behavior. Guards are particularly trained to do this. If security senses suspicious behavior, they immediately pull the person and their belongings off to the side away from the gate. Okay, this should make you feel even more comfortable and relaxed. People are doing their jobs and they're doing it well. Prior to you arriving in London, though, and going to the concert, you've learned from reading my book and the other one, Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone While You Travel, that 1, who you are, 2, how to employ a protection mentality to think through scenarios that could lead to a terrorist attack on your way to the concert. You know the methods terrorists use to identify targets, where they feel they can inflict the most damage. And you understand how to look for suspicious behavior, which will become noticeably instinctive because of the time you spent learning about how terrorists operate, think, and behave. It's not it's not a demanding process for you now. So from the time you leave your hotel, enter the tube terminal and take the train to the concert stadium, exit the tube terminal and make your way towards your entrance gate and enter the concert, you are relaxed and confident in your ability to recognize suspicious behavior and react properly to a perceived threat. You can do this because your trip preparation provided a well-planned route to and from the concert. You also identified in advance where the gate would be in relation to the tube exit station and the most direct path to get there. In other words, you don't appear confused to any criminals or terrorists. From the time you leave your hotel until the time you arrive back, you will experience less fear and enjoy yourself more because you were prepared. You have prepared for your trip and concert the same way a special operations team prepares for a mission with the objective of no casualties. In your case, not only is your objective not to be a casualty, but to relax and enjoy your trip and concert. You had a protection strategy for London and the concert. You did not have to think about what to look for because you knew enough information to know you would spot suspicious behavior instinctively and quickly. Because you're confident in your ability to recognize suspicious behavior quickly with minimal thinking, you don't worry about everyone who's on the train that looks like a Muslim. You can relax around people and enjoy their company during the train ride. You instantly see the high level of security, which lowers the need to be on alert, and you can enjoy your trip and your concert. You can focus on taking pictures and videos that will become memories as opposed to wondering about strangely dressed people. If something did happen, you already know the exits. You will not panic, and you know how to avoid being trampled by the crowd who is in a state of panic. This is an example of how a little time learning about protection mentality can help you live a more relaxed and enjoyable life around others in a world that's being bombarded by violence in the media. At the start of this video, I ask how you can protect yourself. It begins with you, understanding who you are and understanding you are accountable for your protection. You can protect yourself and your loved ones better by spending a little time learning about protection and the tools that will make it instinctive and reduce the fear of threats to your life, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. I hope this video is enlightening and encourages you to take the steps to learn about how to protect yourself. A great first step is reading my book, Creating a Bad Guy Free Zone: How the Average Citizen Can Protect Themselves. This book is unique in focusing on protection versus self-defense. It's also unique in that it is written for the average citizen and not for protection and security professionals. My daily prayer is for a safer and secure world for all of us. That is why I will be out there creating bad guy free zones. Be safe, and may God bless you and your loved ones. I'm Victor Vogel.